My name is Randy, and I'm a grateful member of Al-Anon. And it's good to be here with all of you tonight, and hopefully you can hear me. I'd like to thank the committee for asking me to come out, Luis and everybody in the group for having me. I've met so many people just in the few minutes that I came, and that everybody's been so welcoming and gracious and nice and chatty, and let me pray in the back room, which was really great. And so it's good to be here with all of you. I have a sponsor. His name is Chris. Chris Ann. He lives in Denver, Colorado, and I have a home group that meets on Zoom on Wednesday nights. It's been a real lifesaver for me in the last 5 years since I came to Al-Anon, this time to stay, hopefully, today. I'd encountered Al-Anon before, but I had never understood the first step in Al-Anon before I got here, and how that came about for me in 2019. When I got here, I lived just up the road. I moved here from Mount Vernon after being all around the country and coming back home to Washington because I thought that would solve all of my problems with alcoholism and with the alcoholics that I knew and the life that we were living. If we could just get back here and make this geographic change, everything would be better, and it wasn't. And so in 2019, I moved out to La Conner because I thought if I came out here, I could be closer to the situation that I had going on, and I could fix it, right? And it would be temporary. And I moved into the woods out here on this little farm in this old barn that got converted into a little apartment. And I moved in there in July of 2019, thinking that I was riding pretty high in the world, but not realizing just how low and dark and small my life was. And I moved into this place. It was going to be temporary. I didn't have any furniture. I didn't have any, things on the wall. It was not a home, right? I didn't even have a bed. Yet here I was thinking that I'm going to solve alcoholism. That's how delusional or in denial I was about the power of this disease to impact families. And the way that I, expressed love and the way that I thought I was expressing love and concern and care for others, and the way that I saw the world, may have been in the neighborhood of where it was supposed to be, but it was just missing the mark in ways that were harmful to myself and others. In 2019, I came to the rooms of Al-Anon, and I thought that I knew everything there was to know about alcoholism. I thought I knew how to help somebody get sober. I thought I knew what the answers was, and if I could just put the words in the right package, that could help her or him or whoever solve their problem. Because after all, hadn't I seen it work for so many people? Right? So I thought I came into Al-Anon, and it was a really tricky place for me to be, thinking that I knew everything. Yet, if you looked at my life, you would say clearly there is something wrong in this guy's life with the way that he's living and the way that he's acting and the way that he's thinking, right? And I just feel so bad for those first people in Al-Anon that had to experience me when I came in, and all I could do was talk about them. Right? Because I didn't know what Al-Anon was, right? I didn't know what the solution that Al-Anon offered was, right? I came in and I realized now I forgot to set my timer. Oh, no, I did. It's going. Thank you. See, healing is possible. So I came in, and I just didn't know what Al-Anon was. I'd been exposed to Al-Anon. I'd been coming to meetings like this where there would be an Al-Anon speaker, and every time they would speak, I would say, oh yeah, they're telling my story. I think Al-Anon might be helpful for me, right? I would go to a conference and they would have an Al-Anon speaker and Al-Anon panels, and I would hear them and I would go, God, they have something. Like they're telling my story. Why do I feel like this when I hear the Al-Anon speakers speak, right? But then I would go home and I would forget all about Al-Anon, right? 10 years before, I was in Louisville, Kentucky, and I went to Al-Anon meetings. It was suggested to me that I go to a few Al-Anon meetings, and I went, right? But I could not hear, right? I picked up some literature, but I didn't read the literature, right? I would come home, I would set it on the table or whatever, I would just leave it out. And my wife would say, "Oh, you went to an Al-Anon meeting?" It's like, "Yes." It's like, "Oh, because of me," right? And then that would start this whole cycle of things, right? Of two people who didn't understand Al-Anon arguing about Al-Anon, right? Which is never a fun place to be. So I didn't know what Al-Anon was. I thought I did. I had a lot of prejudice against it. I had a lot of, jokes that I'd heard over the years that I thought were funny that I don't think are so funny anymore. But I didn't know. I did not know that I needed this solution until I did. I didn't know I understood powerlessness until I understood powerlessness. So in 2019, I was living out here in the woods at Snoosh, thinking that I was going to solve someone else's alcohol problem, right? And my actions looked like people-pleasing. My actions looked like, I will do for you what you can do for you, right? All the while trying to demonstrate that I have this solution that can help this other person who's dealing with the effects of alcoholism. And yet, what am I doing? What do I look like? I'm isolated. I'm living in the woods. I don't have any furniture. I don't have a bed. I'm eating myself to death because I can't deal with the emotions, and I'm pulling my hair out, like literally pulling my hair out. That's not a metaphor, right? That's how much pain was happening in my life as we lived with the family disease of alcoholism, right? I had this beautiful hair, and that's how alcoholism impacted my life, right? And so I was doing all these kinds of behaviors, but still thinking if I just said the right thing, right, then this person will understand, and they will start their journey, and maybe I'll get a pat on the back or something, thinking that I am the messenger, right? That I am the person that this person can't hear me. No matter how much I love them, no matter how much I want to help them, they cannot hear me. I am not their messenger. There are many messengers, and they have their own higher power, right? But I didn't understand that. I didn't realize that. I thought that I could do something about this, if only, right? How much of my time and worry did I spend? If only, then I would be okay. Then life would be okay, right? And what happened is that I didn't have a life. I wasn't able to care for anyone. I wasn't caring for myself. How could I care for other people, right? And in the midst of this, right, this was a relationship that had developed over the course of many years, and we had been divorced for 3 years, yet we were still intertwined like this. All these years later, most people get divorced and then whatever happens. That didn't happen. It was like a very hard process of doing that because we were affected by the family disease of alcoholism, right? And so one of the things, and still all of that was happening to me, or I was experiencing that or behaving in this way, thinking it was about them, not understanding the first step in Al-Anon, not understanding powerlessness, right? Despite all my experience around recovery, right, this is where I was at, right? And I'd lost contact with my higher power, right? And so I went to that conference down at Warm Beach in the summer of 2019, and for some reason that year it was different, and there was a guy there, and I heard him speak from the podium, and I thought, that guy can help me, right? That guy has a solution. That guy has experienced things that I've experienced, and he's clearly living a much different life than the one that I am living. And so I went up to him and I asked him for help, and without really understanding what that was going to look like or involved. I mean, he lives 3 states away, or however far Colorado is away. But during the course of that weekend, I kind of hung close to him, and I stuck close to him, and I talked to him, and he started, sponsoring me like right immediately. But by just talking to me and, calling me on my thinking, right? There was a speaker at this conference, and I knew if this person heard this speaker tape, they would get sober. Right? Their life would change. And if only I got it and I gave it to them, what miracles might happen. Maybe that's true, right? But I asked I said to Chris, I said, do you think if I got this tape and I gave that to her, that would be helpful? He was like, no. And so began my journey in Al-Anon. And for some reason, after that conference, when I went back home, right, I didn't forget about Al-Anon this time. I started to go to a meeting. I started to call him every single day, right? And he doesn't know me. He lives far away, but here I am. I'm calling him. I'm talking to him. He's getting to know me. We are starting to take the steps and talk about what powerlessness is. Talk about what this problem is. Right? The problem is not them, right? I had to learn through my own experience that the problem is in me. This is the way that I react to the world. It is the way that I see the world. It is the way that I act in the world and think in the world that is the issue that I need to work on and have a higher power and connect so that I can actually show up and connect with you in a proper way. Right? And I didn't understand that was what was happening to me. I didn't know myself very well at that point. I didn't understand how to be a friend or to be a husband or to be a son, right? Because of all the things that had happened over the course of my life that I was going to begin to examine, right? And so that was the idea of stop talking about her, or him, or them, or whoever, all of these people that I knew that I wanted to call and talk about. Here's what's happened, right? Which doesn't get you very far, right? Okay, well, what are you doing? What is your role? What is your part? What did you do? How did you contribute to this? All of these things that I'd never thought about because don't you know who I am? I'm showing up with, this is how I love people. Right? Not understanding that as I'm operating from fear and insecurity, and that's putting people off. It's causing conflict. It is bringing pain and suffering into my life, right? It's like, oh my God, it's me, right? And I think every Al-Anon has to come to that realization sometimes because we come to Al-Anon, and a lot of us do. I don't want to speak for anyone but myself, but I come to Al-Anon thinking I'm going to get relief from something that is not the problem, right? And so my first step is having to understand where the problem lies so that I can make use of the solution that's offered in Al-Anon. And I didn't get that until this time when I came into the program. And so we started to look at some of the causes and conditions and, and what that solution would be. And it was really hard because I wanted to do the steps really fast because I wanted to have a different experience. But we went very slow. We talked a lot. I wrote a lot. There was all these phone calls. Every day after work, I would get off and I would call him, not understanding he's giving me his time, 30 minutes or an hour every single day, and we're talking, and he's listening to me, and he's learning about my life and my past, right, and how I behave, so that we can understand this, so that I can begin to have a new experience and live differently and act differently and connect with my higher power by taking the steps, right? And coming to an understanding of God and what are the spiritual principles behind each step that we're doing, right? So that when I encounter you, I can connect with you. I can show up for you as a friend today in ways that I couldn't before. That doesn't mean that I don't fail, right? Because I do, right? And so we started to look at this kind of stuff, and I could by the time we got to the fourth step and started talking about that, the fourth and the fifth step, I began to learn and look and see at patterns of all this stuff that I thought started in this one particular relationship. It's no. It's this is going way back, right? There are generations of alcoholism in my family, right? That impacted us in certain ways. It affected the way that, my parents were born and raised, and the way that we were raised together, and the things that happened in our house growing up, so that I could look at it and say that, something happened to me when, someone drove the car across the front lawn or threw pancakes off the wall, or something happened when my sister had to gather us together to protect us, right? Something happened, things happened in our household so that my sister, our protector, left as soon as she turned 18 and never came back, right? Those things impact the way that I see the world and understand the world and live in the world and have fear about the world and how I need to make things okay for you so that I can be okay, right? That how things were happening in that house that I couldn't tolerate or deal with, right? That I had to escape and go up the street, and where did I land, right? With the biggest drinking house on the block, right? So that when 15-year-old Jeff flipped over the table and sent the macaroni and cheese all across the room, I knew, like, okay, if I can help him and clean this up, no one will get in trouble, everything will be okay, right? There's a role for me here, right? I can show that I can show him that I care and he'll love me because I've taken care of him, right? Things like that start to happen, and this is how I come to understand how I need to show love in the world and how I can get people to care about me. Is this all misguided? So I might have a good intention and a good motive, but it comes out in these weird ways, right? So, all these kinds of experiences, I begin to surround myself with alcoholics and begin to want to care for them and caretake and solve their problems and get them out of trouble and make their life easier because I get some sort of feeling out of that makes me feel like I'm alive and that I'm cared for and that people will like me, right? I don't know how to make a true friendship or anything like that, but if you want to get drunk, and make bad decisions and do whatever, then I'm going to be there for you. Right? So all kinds of stories like that. And if you want to, if the most beautiful woman at the party wants to gather me up and give me a haircut at 5 o'clock in the morning, isn't that love? Right? She's giving me love, right? She gave me a haircut, and then I went to work the next day and didn't understand why people were laughing at me because it was all not straight throughout, But that's how I thought. At the time, at 5 o'clock in the morning, you asked me, this is what life is. This is what love is. This is the kind of feeling that I'm after, like that quick bit of love, So all kinds of stories like that. If you want to call me in the middle of the night and tell me you're not coming home, isn't that because I didn't love you enough? If I love you harder, won't that make you stay, right? All these kinds of things that I had to talk through and learn about how I was showing up in these relationships, how I was picking out these people, what I was doing, right? And then the way that came back and helped cut me, and how the ways that harmed me in my thinking and the way that I can show up for another person, right? And it just kept cascading and stuff. And so in 2019, this is where I'm at now. I'm talking to this guy every single day, and I think I need some relief, but I'm not getting any relief. I think it's going to get better because I'm in Al-Anon, and I'm already taking the steps, and things ought to get better. And everything got worse. Like my entire life burned down, right? Because of alcoholism and the way that it impacts people who are trying to do the best that they can, right? And when that cauldron of alcoholism is going and there is no relief, right? And, you just worry. I fill myself with worry, right? That, I am not a higher power. I'm not anyone's higher power, but if I worry enough, and I'm concerned enough and I make the right phone calls, right, then things will be okay. Where I had to come to understand that it doesn't matter what I do, right? Or what I think, or whatever it is. I am totally independent of other people, right? Especially if they're not asking me for help, right? So there were lots of phone calls from institutions, and lots of phone calls in the middle of the morning, in the middle of the night, and everything, and asking for $500 and for whatever, and phone calls from the police and all these kinds of things. Happening, but one thing that was different this time is that I had a sponsor, right? So instead of just dropping everything and doing this, I would call my sponsor, say, this is what I was asked to do, and this is what I'm going to do. I made it, I got this phone call from an institution, and I was given this list of things that were needed, and I'm going to do this. But I'm at work. I have a child at home. If I go and do this, I won't be back till the middle of the night, right? Do you think that's a good idea? It's like, okay, well, maybe that's not your job to do that. Maybe there are other people that can fill this role, right? Or maybe that she's in the right place and she's being provided for and she's safe, right? And so I could not do that kind of thing, and there were other phone calls that were really hard, like almost the worst kind of phone calls that you could ever get, all right? But it's not about her, and it's about or them or anybody else, right? It's about how I reacted to that and the ways that I could do that. I didn't know what the right answers were, and I would call and ask, this is what happened. I'm really scared, what do I do? And I would reason that out, and I would talk, and I would get to a solution in a way that would act in a way that allowed other people to have the dignity of their own choices, right? That I wasn't going to make their choices for them, even if I think I know best. And that's part of the problem, is that I think I know, and I get so attached to the idea that I think I know that I can't even consider that I might be wrong, right? That I might be interfering with someone else's ability to live their life, right? And have whatever experience that they need to have, right? Because I'm so concerned that I'm going to get in the way, right? Not because I think it's going to be better for them, that's what I thought, but if I look at it, it's because I think I'm going to feel better because of it, right? Which is not a God-centered principle, to live by, right? Which is what I'm after today, I'm after a connection with a higher power that allows me to show up with you with motives that are aligned with love and kindness. And that's mostly where I come from today, right? But I'm human and I make mistakes, right? But I have a way to clean those mistakes up and own my part and get through with all of that, right? And so we began to go through that. My relationship began to change with all the people about me, right? When I found the power of no, right? No is a complete sentence, right? That the way that I was behaving was being harmful to others, right? I didn't understand how that or why that was, right, until I came to Al-Anon, right? That doesn't mean I don't help people or I can't help people or I can't show up for them, but I really know today why I'm there and what I'm doing, and I get to make my own choices for the reasons that I understand, right? And because those reasons and choices are centered in a spiritual life and a spiritual path, right? And then I get to own the consequences of that, right? I get to love more appropriately today than when I came in, right? I get an opportunity to show up as a friend and a son and all of that, right? I get to have ideals about life, right? And understand why I move and why I live in the world as the way I did, right? So when I was doing my fourth and the fifth step, and we talked more in the sixth and the seventh step, about ideals and principles and institutions, and when I did my step work on that, of course I had all the names and whatever, but we didn't spend so much time talking about those. We spent hours talking about institutions and ideas, like marriage and love and family and dating and being a son, right? Being a father, right? Ways that I show up, and understanding what I believe. Like, what are those stories that I tell myself about what all these things mean? And if they look like this in my life, then I'll be okay, right? But how do I find a God-centered ideal around those that I get to work towards, right? We spend so much time looking at and unpacking all of those things, so that I could come forward into this world with a new experience, right? And I have a relationship with my dad, right, which maybe I'll talk more about in a minute, but so I get to go do those kinds of things. I get to make amends to people. I get to show up and say, when I did this, how did that make you feel? Those kinds of conversations and questions, and I got to sit and listen to those things, right? And I get to have an opportunity to live in a different way than I did before, right? So I'm living out here in the woods, and my world is small and it's isolated, but I'm taking the steps. I'm starting to meet people. But my frame of reference and my perspective is still skewed, right? I remember calling an Al-Anon friend one day, and I was upset about something that somebody had done, right? And that's what I wanted to talk about, right? But she told me right away it was none of my business. And she wouldn't talk to me about it because it was none of my business. And it wasn't my business, right? And she lived in Colorado, and there was she doesn't care about neighbors 2 doors down, and why am I concerned about them, But I had this whole story in my head about how it impacted my life and why they were wrong, right? In reality, it was none of my business, and I was wasting energy in my life talking about that. Instead, what happened is we started to have a conversation, and she told me the story about how she got a bed in Al-Anon. How she was, just talking one day to her sponsor or whatever, and her sponsor said, "You don't have a bed?" It's you need to go get a bed right now. And when she's telling me the story, I'm thinking about, I don't have a bed, and I got a bed that day, right? So that's, as a result of Al-Anon. And then I learned in Al-Anon, we make our beds, right? That's another story. But, and I had that conversation. And as part of that conversation, she was asking about where I live. And so she hadn't been out here before. Her name was Brenda, and she was telling me all about, her life. And she was asking me, well, what's it like around you? Can you describe it to me? And in that moment, I was so grim and dark, right? There was no joy. I was not happy. It wasn't free, right? But I began to describe to her this place where I'm living, and all the trees and the water, and the hiking trails and the parks and all of this stuff, and the way the sun sets and everything, but I'm telling it in a very negative way, right? There's nobody around. It's all, whatever, blah, 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 and all this stuff. And I got done telling her this, and she said, wow, that sounds amazing. I would love to come visit out here. In that moment when she said that, it's like my whole world went from black and white to color, right? And I began to see the world differently, right? To actually see it as it is here, right? I couldn't get there on my own because I thought I knew, right? And what I had forgot to mention, I'd lived all around the country. I grew up in Mount Vernon, right? And when I left Mount Vernon, I couldn't wait to get out of the Skagit Valley and never come back, right? So I was resentful about the fact that I was back here because I thought it meant my life had failed, right, in this big way. And so I'd failed at all these things, and that failure was another thing that I had to look at in the steps and understand and get a new perspective that worked for me, to see that I wasn't a failure, right? But I had that resentment that I had to work through, and it impacted the way that I saw this world that we live in, right? That is now is just ever since then I look at the world with wonder when I go out into the world, and I pinch myself, right? I still live in that same place, right? But today it's different. Today it's a home, right? I have furniture. I have pictures of my daughter all over the walls, pictures of myself, right? Things that I like, books. You come in there, you're not in a cave, right? You're coming into a home that is filled with love and joy and freedom and happiness, right? But I still live in the same place that I did when I came here. That same place that I thought was going to be temporary, right? As a result of Al-Anon, it's become a home, right? And a place that's meaningful for my daughter and I, right? That we get to live and we get to share, right? And we get to laugh in, right? Today when I woke up, I had I had to have a life that is satisfying to me, right? It couldn't be connected or dependent on anybody else's life. It had to be about my connection with my higher power and a life that is meaningful to me, because I'd lost sight of the things that I liked in the world, right? I lost sight of the things that brought me joy in the world, the things that made me who I am in the world, right? And so I had to learn all of those things very slowly in Al-Anon, right? while experiencing a great deal and amount of pain, right? Lots of nights crying myself to sleep. My sponsor said, don't do your 4-step right before you go to bed, right? Don't do your, why don't you do your 10th and 11th step and things in the morning and send that to me, because I would do it at night and then I would lay awake thinking about it, right? And I would have to put on like a recovery speaker tapes, Al-Anon speaker tapes to just go to sleep at night. And so I grew in that place. I grew up there. One of the things that I was doing, I mentioned that I was eating myself to death and not able to look at the way that I was living in the world, right? I began to write ideals about, okay, well, what is the step 2 physical idea, sanity of my relationship with food or exercise, And one of the things that I did was my sponsor said, well, why don't you, my mailbox is a 1/4 mile away, and I was driving my car to the mailbox every day to get the mail. And he's like, well, why don't you start walking to the mailbox? I was like, I don't know, it's downhill, and then I got to walk up the hill, and I'm not so sure I'm into that. But I was in the business because I was so desperate when I made my 3rd step prayer that I was willing to do whatever it took to have this new experience of recovery. I started walking to the mailbox, right? And I would do that every day, right? And then he would say, okay, good. When you go down there, put a rock in the box, and then go back and get that rock later and do it twice. And so I started doing that, right? And then over time, I began to put all of these pieces into place, right? And really what I was teaching me was about self-care. That's the same idea with getting the bed, right? I'm worthy of sleeping in a bed, right? I have worth that comes from in me and God, right? I get to take care of myself. I get to go to the dentist. I get to brush my teeth. I get to go get for a checkup, right? I get to make meals for myself that I like, right? I get to do all these things. I get to learn about how to do all of that in Al-Anon, right? Things that, maybe I should have learned before, but I'm learning them now, right? And as a result of that, I begin to have a new experience, right? I continue to do that until I'm running to the mailbox. I don't like to run, but then I run and I realize, gosh, I feel like I was when I was in 6th grade and I was running. And you know what that feeling is freedom, right? Then I got shin splints and had to sit out for a while. But, I learned through pain. And so, but doing all of that kind of stuff, and my life began to change, my attitude began to change, my body began to change, and I continued to do things. And then it's like, okay, well, 3 years ago, somebody said, why have you thought about lifting some weights? And I thought, no. And, but eventually, I never let go of it, and I started doing that in February. I didn't know anything, how to do it or whatever, but, there's YouTube, and you can ask people, and people will show you, and all this stuff. And so, little by little, I'm putting all these pieces together of things that I've learned in Al-Anon about how to take care of myself. And by putting the focus back on me, by, learning to take care of myself, right, I can then properly show up for others, right, in a way that is meaningful for both of us. How much time do I have? Okay. I have 6 minutes, but you say 14, so we'll see how far we go. Thank you. And then because I can do that, right, then I can share my experience with others, right? And in the Al-Anon preamble, it talks about giving first aid and comfort to the families of alcoholics and encouragement and understanding to the alcoholic, right? Imagine I've been coming down on for how many years and never got that part, right? Encouragement and understanding to the alcoholic, right? What does that look like, right? How do I show up in that life and accept them as they are, who they are as perfect children of God, right? And begin to actually practice that 5th tradition of Al-Anon, right? And one of the ways that I do that is with my dad, right? Here is my dad who gave up. When I was growing up, and after that, there were periods of time where we didn't speak, 5 years, where we didn't talk, right? And I was moving around the country and the world in different places, right? But whenever I'd call home, he would never get on the phone, right? My mom would get on the phone, but he would never get on the phone. And I never asked for him. I never asked about him. Never wanted to have a conversation with him, But when I came back to Washington, he opened his door and welcomed me into his house, right? And even then, I didn't get it, right? Because what I was looking for was this certain idea of what it meant for a father and son to interact with each other, right? Again, this warped idea of what I thought it should be, right? And how that's not how it is, but that doesn't mean that I'm missing out on something. So I had to learn in Al-Anon how to show up for my dad and to be in that relationship and to be a son and and what I discovered is that I was very judgmental, which was really surprising to me that I was judging him in all of these ways that I had judged him, and it was extremely negative for all the things that he had done or did not do, which is still, I have to go to God with that all the time, and my sponsor, And so when I go over to his place today, right, for a while I would go in and, I would count all the beer, right? Count the drinks, just to know what the mood would be or whatever, or get a sense, of where we're at, right? Which he would know what I'm doing, right? Because even if I'm just looking in the fridge, it's he knows what I'm doing, right? And one day he snapped at me from his easy chair. He's like, "Stop counting my beer." And I mouthed back at him, right? Because I'm justified, right? This is what I need, I feel like I'm right, right? And when I left there, I called my sponsor and said, my dad yelled at me tonight. And this is what he said to me. And I told him, and then I had to turn around and go back and make amends to my dad. So, and I don't do that anymore. I don't go over to his place and open the refrigerator and see what's in there, unless I'm thirsty and want something to drink. And, when I show up and we talk, right, I don't comment. I have a running commentary on what he's watching and why it's all screwed up or whatever, I'm not critical of the way that he's living in the world anymore, which I didn't even understand I was doing that before. But all of these ways where I was thinking I'm better than him, right? To a man that opened his doors for me, that raised me, that showed up for me in all of these ways, and this is how I'm behaving in that relationship, right? But I'm not his God. I'm not his higher power. I am his son. How do I show up as a kind and loving son? Right? Today, that looks like I go over there, I sit on the couch, I watch whatever he's watching, I ask him questions about his life, and I care about what he tells me, right? He's deaf in this ear, and he sits, that's the ear that he can hear through is always away from me. My whole life, it's been like that, and that was one of my resentments, is that he couldn't hear me, so I didn't talk to him, right? Because then I would try to get his attention, and then he would yell at me what? So that was one of the things that I had to learn how to talk to him in Al-Anon, appropriately, right, where he could see me, and hear me. And I'm very quiet when I'm at home or talking to my dad or whatever. I don't know how I got on this, but, so I could show up for him in that way. I could go just be with him and spend time with him, right? So far, I've been looking for him to say, "I love you." Right? That's what I really want him to say to me, and he's never said that to me, and he doesn't ever have to say that to me because today I know he does, right? When I go over there, I know that he loves me because he sends me out the door with armloads of food every day, every time I go. If he comes and visits me, which he does, he brings me food, right? He showed up for my daughter, right? The other day he was out there, and he showed my daughter how to jumpstart a car. And I thought, he never taught me that. So I was really mad. And I like called my sponsor, and he's like, well, how great is it that your dad gets to show your daughter this? And where were you? Why weren't you standing right there to have that experience, right? And so I get all these kinds of new experiences, and I get to have a relationship with him. I get to show up for him. We get to laugh. We get to, sometimes we snap at each other, and we get to make it right in the moment, right? A couple weeks ago, I'll tell this last two stories, and then I'll be done. It was my daughter's 12th birthday, and we got to have a party. There were all these middle school girls that came, and some adults, and also there, my ex-wife was there, my dad was there. Everybody got to show up, and there was a party, and it was a good time. Everybody laughed. They had cupcakes. They ran off playing. Everybody got along. We talked, and we got to celebrate my daughter, right? That doesn't happen without Al-Anon, right? That we were all together like that, and then we all got to go our separate ways at the end, right? That's because of Al-Anon, that we were able to have that meeting, and we were able to be there in peace, right? My daughter does not have to see me parent her mother anymore. It's not my job. It never was, and that shouldn't have happened. Right? But I didn't know that until I came to Al-Anon, that that's what I was doing. I just thought, I love you. This is what love looks like. So I had to learn a lot about what love is. And I had to learn that what I think is good, what I think is right, and what I think is proper is sometimes misguided. I need help. I need a sponsor. I need a higher power, right? And I'll close with this, right? Why sponsorship in Al-Anon has been so important for me. Right? A few months ago, I was up in Bellingham, and they have this heronry there where all the herons live. I don't know if you like birds or anything, but I like herons. And, they were mating and hatching and had been born or whatever. And I went up to see these new birds and stuff, and they're in all the trees. And I'd never been there before, so I don't know what it is. I just have this idea of what it's going to be like and all this stuff. And so I'm meeting this person there, and she's taking us back to see this she's my guide, And she takes us back into the first turn, and we go, and there's all these trees, and I can look, and it's kind of hard to see, but if you look just right, you can see some birds back there. And I just thought, this is amazing. This is, wow, how fortunate am I to have this experience, to get to see these beautiful birds like this. It's kind of hard to see, but that's, whatever. And so she says, no, wait. And she grabs my arm, and she says, come a little farther. You haven't gone far enough. She takes us around, and it opens up into this wide open space, and you can see all the nests, all the birds. You can hear them, you can see them flying, and it is the most magnificent thing that I've seen in a long time in this place, right? And I would have missed it because I had thought I'd gotten far enough, right? With my own thinking, my own ideas, right? I could only see a few birds with the trees, right? But when I stopped and let go and let somebody guide me, I got to see this whole beautiful picture, right? And in that beautiful picture, the world is beautiful and full of wonder, right? And a lot of the things that have happened in my life are still the same as they were 5 years ago, right? I still live in the same place, still have the same people in my life, still have the same job, all these things. Yet, the way I see the world is different. The way that I experience the world is different. The way I show up for you is different. I want to come to you now and connect, right? I can do that appropriately. I can see all of the beautiful people, right, who are doing the best they can on a daily basis, right? And that's why I need connection to God and to higher power, right? Because it's not about them. It's not about that external world. It's about me and inside me and how I can show up. Thanks.